Hey, welcome to What You Doin' with Brandon Horwin.
And Sophie Williams. And today's special guest
It's
is
Brad Oscar live from New York City. Very happy to be here and tell you what I'm doing.
Well, great. We are thrilled to have you, and thank you for joining us on What You Doin'.
Pleasure, my pleasure.
So I just want to start out and ask you a little bit if you can take us through your journey to theater and sort of where all the roads took you to land up where you are today.
Mhm. Well, they all started in Washington, D.C., born and raised. My parents are D.C. natives. And in that respect, that's where my theatrical education began because from an early age, I took to it. My parents loved the theater, took me to the theater, did some community theater of their own. So, I was introduced to it and it sort of came naturally in that way and was nurtured. So, and then was lucky enough to grow up in a town that at the time was, I mean, the theater town now in DC is extraordinary. The community is unbelievable. But when I was growing up, we had certainly Arena and Folger, and my education was certainly done in places like that as well. But we were also a big out of town tryout for pre-Broadway shows. So I got to see a lot of shows in DC before they would come to New York and see them change and develop and stuff like that. So anyway, so I had, a very traditional, I grew up, in Rockville, Maryland, mostly, and then went off to Boston University, to get my BFA in theater, in acting, and because I had done, my first love was musical theater, and growing up again in DC, I did a ton of musical theater. A lot of it at the JCC in Rockville, the Jewish Community Center, had an extraordinary theater department for kids. Not just during the summer, a summer program where we would do a musical, but then during the school year, just acting classes and basic sort of stuff that I learned there. That when I got to BU, I was like, oh, I know a lot of these breathing techniques. I know a lot of these things, because that was part of my education there. Montgomery College Summer Dinner Theater was also a big
wow.
thing for me as far as that area, doing 3 summers there in the early 80s. But but it was that as far as my education, and then graduating from college and moving to New York City and waiting tables. I mean, again, uh, uh, I sort of, that was what I wanted to do. That had pretty much been cemented that I was, going to come to the city. And at that point, again, it wasn't like I was going to go back to DC because you couldn't really make a living as a professional in DC at the time. It's much easier now, or certainly you can juggle easier. And the work, the amount of union work certainly down there was so much more. But yeah, but I knew that, ideally this was the world I wanted to be a part of. It was Fantasyland. So I started, waiting tables and auditioning. I mean, did the thing, went to the open calls, um, and then eventually got a job. Thank God. Yeah, yeah,
Love that Montgomery College Summer Dinner Theater shout out. We've got a
yeah,
lot of friends there.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I'm so, it's so thrilling because obviously there's so many things, you're a part of over the years that don't exist anymore, programs and things like that. And so, yeah, it's just so thrilling to me that it still exists and will exist again. Of course, they couldn't do last summer, as we know, but yeah, it's a great training ground. I mean, those are the things you want to do. If you love doing it, right? What's better, during the summer? Literally, let's put on a show, and then let's feed the people too. Yeah. So it was fun. And what's great too is I got to play one role in particular there of the two starring roles that I got to play. I did 3 summers. My first summer, I was in the ensemble of both shows. It was great fun. It was crazy. Um, uh, but the second summer, I got to do the lead in Kiss Me Kate. I got to play Petruchio / Fred in Kiss Me Kate. Now, needless to say, I've never been a leading man kind of guy, even then. And believe me, I was thinner and I had more hair that I got permed at the time for the role. So I had my little Jufro. You'll pardon. I know that's politically incorrect, but I'm sorry, people. Please love me for who I am. But anyway, so, but I got to play that role, and, believe me, again, I even talking about it, I'm like, my God, yes, I was so, I look at pictures of myself, I'm like, who is that? But it was a role that at the time, even I knew, because that was the summer I'd come home from BU to do that, I was at home during the summers. I knew I was a young character actor. I knew, I wasn't going to play, all of those kinds of roles, especially, those classic hero roles, any of the Rodgers and Hammerstein, whatever. And I didn't really even want to. But, Kiss Me Kate is a whole other thing in its own way. So anyway, my point is, it was an amazing experience to be able to play a role like that, knowing in my head, and that's not the real world, thank God, right? That's the world we exist in. And I thought I was pretty damn good, actually. But yes, it was a great place to, and those experiences, I say this often too, just to tie it in real quick. When I eventually had to go on for Nathan Lane, because I was his understudy for the first year of the producers, as well as playing Franz, I was covering Max. So when Nathan would go down, I would go on. Anyway, so not only the first time, every time I would go on, believe me, the show was such a hit. Everyone wanted to see Nathan. I'm like, what can I do? How am I going to do? Oh my God, the expectation, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, just go out there and do what you do. Trust what you do or whatever. And remember, when you were the star of the show at Montgomery College, you know what that means. And I mean all the good things about that. I mean the responsibilities that entails. I mean the trust that you have to give yourself, the belief, that larger than life energy that needs to carry you through, especially in a show like that. And those were things that I got to experience at Montgomery College, that I took with me for sure. Yeah.
Well, that's amazing.
Yeah.
You first started out in the Andrew Lloyd Webber show, Aspects of Love.
Exactly.
What an exciting experience to do something so rare.
Yeah, it was exactly. I mean, it was, yeah. I mean, at the time, of course, it was going to be his next show after Phantom. So there were certain expectations, but everybody also knew it was a very different kind of show. And indeed it is. And I still think it's a beautiful score. Lyrically, it's a little challenged at times, but I think musically, he wrote a beautiful score. But yeah, it was a swing. It was great. It was a good show for me to swing in that way, because there wasn't a big dance show, and so I covered some of the character men in the ensemble, of course, and one principal role, which was lovely. But yeah, what was fun being a part of it is that production was done, top of the shop. They spent so much money on that show because they could at the time. They were, Weber and Really Useful, and that whole, because it wasn't a Cameron McIntosh production. It was Really Useful, which was Weber's own company. So anyway, they were rolling in it, of course, and they were, and I was a swing. So I had all these sets of costumes for all the men I was covering. And all the men I was covering at least had 5 or 6 outfits each, because the show takes place over a period of time. And of course, the ensemble functioned in all those ways and all those different places and people. So I had the most extraordinary, I mean, I say a set of costume. I had 5 sets of costumes. When the show closed, it only ran a year, but still a nice, that was good, because believe me, it didn't sell for a year. There were plenty of empty mezzanines, but we got to keep our shoes. You often get to keep your shoes because there's a union rule, I think, that you can't reuse shoes. You can't give someone, shoes that have been worn. Believe me, not, it doesn't happen, I'm sure. But anyway, I have shoes to this day that from Aspects of Love, because again, these were Italian shoes that cost hundreds of dollars each, at least. They spent so much money. Our opening night party was the entire top floor of the Rainbow, what used to be the Rainbow Room, and I think is reopened in some form as the Rainbow Room, on the top of 30 Rock. But there's 2 big ballrooms and then space in between, and parties are usually somewhere within that. No, the Aspects of Love party was the 2 ballrooms and all the space in between. It was, I mean, So yes, it was a kick to be a part of. I met some wonderful, performer, people like that, of course, and got to work with Trevor Nunn, which was, a wonderful thing. And so yeah, and was doing my first Broadway show. Went from waiting tables on 45th Street to walking through the Broadhurst stage door on 44th Street, which never ceased, to to not only delight me, but that I was, just fully aware of the randomness of life in the business, because here I was waiting tables with a bunch of guys we were all trying to do the same thing pretty much. And, yes, there's talent, but as you guys know already, there's a randomness of, it's very subjective as well. So there's no, so yes, I've always considered myself blessed and lucky in that way, especially, gosh, when I'm working, here in New York and working on Broadway. It's like, because it's everything I ever dreamt of.
Yeah. I mean, going off of that, you have appeared in 12 Broadway productions.
No, I think
original-
you're overestimating.
Are we sure?
No, it's only like,
Search wrong?
no, it's like 8 or 9. But you're sweet. Let's see, what can we put me in just for fun? No, I mean, I love that. I'm interested to hear your tally, but I'm pretty sure, because Mrs. Doubtfire, which I'm currently involved with, meaning we did 3 previews and we'll be back someday. But I thought that was my 9th. But what do I know? I'm getting very old. I've done a lot. Anyway, no, I mean, again, yes. Even saying that, I'm like, really? That's pretty cool. So
Yeah.
yeah.
You've been originating roles in many of these shows, like Big Fish on the 20th Century, Jekyll and Hyde. So can you explain that creative process as an actor for our audience of originating roles?
Okay, I got one now on the 20th Century. That was an Actors Fund benefit thing. It was a one-night thing. But there we go. There's one. Ironically, first Broadway show I ever saw on the original production of On the 20th Century at the St. James Theater, where I would later go on to do both the producers and Something Rotten. So how bizarre is that? Better than being, in the room and part of the creative process on a new piece. There's no question. Because these days, the way things are so workshopped, and you do so many readings because it costs so much to produce these things. So they're ideally not going to produce the thing right until they have a pretty good sense of what it is. Over the years, when I've had the opportunity to be in that position, and have learned, especially when you're in a room with generous collaborative people, especially on the judgmental end, as I see it, right? The director, the choreographer, the writers, you want to please these people. By the same token, you want to bring their material to life for better or for worse, so that we can all, but when you can be a part of that and make suggestions and not feel, I've seen actors who you just have to feel the room in that way, if you know what I mean, right? You have to feel the room because everybody can, the creative process can be a very touchy one, a very emotionally raw and, which is great, which is how it should be. But that's a dangerous place, depending, right, on people's feelings and or response mechanisms or whatever. So, but I feel like it's ultimately, regardless of all that, it's my responsibility to bring as much of myself to the table in those instances, because it's just it's it's why we're professionals. It's why we're doing what we're doing. And when you are bringing material to life like that for the first time, it's my responsibility to the writers, right, and to the other actors, to us all. I've seen some amazing things happen. I mean, especially in the room with Something Rotten, because so much of that happened in the room so much happened. And I say in the room, I mean that specifically when we did this 4-week workshop to basically, put the show on its feet, off book, no, with some costume pieces and a lot of plywood representing scenic design and stuff. And you put it in front of money people, the producer people, to get the money to, blah, blah, blah. And we had scheduled a tryout in Seattle already. A tryout had been scheduled prior to this workshop, or at least a tentative. And everything went so great, we canceled the out-of-town tryout. And then a theater became available. So instead of going to Seattle in the spring of 2015, we opened on Broadway in the spring of 2015. And that never would have happened had that 4 weeks in that room not gone the way it did. When a producer makes a decision for a musical comedy, especially, that we're going to risk not going out of town because you don't know where those laughs, you got to find that, the producers out of town was amazing, if only because, it was going like gangbusters. And we just had to cut stuff because it was too long because of that. I mean, that was again, another unique crazy situation where everybody was on the same page and things were going very well from the start. Rotten, we worked on our feet in New York in previews, which is very dangerous, but they did an amazing job of again of that, the creatives. But anyway, it's yes, it's a joy, especially having, as I said, grown up such a fan of musical theater, growing up listening to cast albums. It is, yeah, quite an honor to be a part of several shows where, I'm on the cast album. It's like, it's just so cool. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just, and it always, yeah. So yes, it's never lost on me. I'll tell you that, because it's, it's a rare, as we know, it's harder and harder, and and especially now, we'll see what we come back to. It's going to be tricky for a little while, just in general, for all of us in the lively arts to work, if you will. So anyway, but yes, there you go. Okay. Yeah.
That's awesome, because you were just touching on my next question about, I just wanted to sort of ask a bit more about your awesome performance as Nostradamus in Something Rotten, and sort of, how you crafted your role for that, in the sense of, the marathon hit number, a musical from that particular musical. And also, then after, subsequent to that, what did this show mean for you and your career in particular? It seems like you started to touch on it, that it meant a lot to you, both in process and sort of what.
Yeah. God, right. So many ways that it means that, that it adds up to be like, wow, that experience, now that I look back on it, obviously, because the show closed, I think a little over 4 years ago we closed. So, and it was basically 2 years of the run on Broadway. And so, gosh, yeah, I mean, again, I was invited in to do a week-long reading of the piece, a couple years before all this actually happened, I guess, and it got on its feet. That was my first involvement. And so, right away I was like, wow, I think this is really funny. This is really, just sort of zany, but clever and new and fresh. And I thought the score was really fun. And, it's tricky to write a new musical theater score that's sort of not poppy, but just doesn't sound, it sounds both, new and old, if you know what I mean, or whatever. It's just, there's something about it that I definitely took to. And I thought, wow, this is my kind of show. And I actually hoped at the time that that Casey and the authors, because that first week-long reading was behind music stands, we were not on our feet. And I thought, what if they want Nostradamus to really be a great dancer? What if part of the joke is that this crazy looking shaggy old thing suddenly becomes, this diva dancer who leads this awesome, ridiculous 10-minute, number that celebrates everything that the American musical comedy is. So, I did not know where we were going after that week-long reading, because believe me, I've done plenty, and everyone does. You're part of projects, and the next thing you know, oh, they just did another reading of X, Y, and Z, and you're like, oh, how did that go? Because they didn't ask me to do the second or the next reading of X, Y, So it is, please, that's showbiz, kid. But anyway, they obviously continued with moi, and Casey was so generous in making sure that I looked good when he was staging that number, when there was specifically a moment of tap that I just could not do, because I'm not a tap, I can work hard and learn certain things, and I learned, some tap, but yeah, I could not do a pullback to save my life. And so and I worked my ass off, and there are plenty of choreographers, directors, whatever, who would have said, okay, well, we'll see you tomorrow. We'll try it again tomorrow. Keep working on it. You'll get it. And it just became a thing. And, but it didn't really become a thing, because before it could become a thing, whatever, Casey was like, oh, we'll find something that looks good on you. We'll find something that works, and that's a joyous, again, that's another thing about, being in that place, that collaborative, wonderful place where someone is like, yeah. And you realize that, the better I am, the better everything is, the better Casey looks, the better the whole, So, yeah. So yes, then, the response to this crazy number, that we thought was an aberration because it was our invited dress rehearsal. So it was all of our friends, family, whatever, industry people, but always a generous, excited audience. And we did that number, and they went bananas for like minutes. I mean, I don't know how, but a long time with Brian and I standing there, and this, Brian and I and 20 other extraordinarily talented, Broadway vets. That ensemble was made up of, it was no one's Broadway debut. Not that that's a bad thing, but I mean, these people had done, it's like we all had this appreciation for what this meant. And then it happened, the first paying preview. And we thought, well, they paid $19.90, whatever the initial price. You could come for some ridiculous price, the first 2 shows or 3 shows. And anyway, it kept happening through opening for several months after. Eventually, it didn't happen nightly, but they would stand up and cheer after this number in 35, 40 minutes into Act 1. And then they'd cheer again after the omelet number in Act 2. Sometimes the same thing would happen, standing ovation. So that, the producers' experience, there was a lot of expectation that came with the producers. The names involved: Mel Brooks, Susan Stroman, Nathan Lane, Matthew Broderick. That show had a pedigree. That show should be and was everything, but people were, all right, here we go, let's see. People were like, what the hell is Something Rotten? Who would name a show Something Rotten? What is this thing? So there was no expectation. There was no even anticipation of what it was. And that was also an extraordinary thing, because, and I think that's what delighted people so much, is that they had no idea what they were about to really see. And because the show ultimately is, like the producers is in many ways, it's a love letter to showbiz, to musical comedy, to all the things that many of us love and many audiences, embrace as well. So, what better than to see a really good example of that done, today, because we don't get to see it that often, because, it just is what it is. So yes, the unexpectedness of that for audiences, and even for us, not to know how the show was going to land and how the show was going to play, was also just thrilling, and beyond. I mean, it's more than you could ask for. So yeah, it was very special. Did I touch on what you were talking about? I'm gonna, as you can tell, listening audience, I will continue to ramble. So please stop me. Hold up your hand, wave me down. But yes.
No, absolutely. Actually, I was just watching the video with Sophie that sort of goes through every musical reference that's in that, and it's just amazing. I was like, I didn't believe that there was the Hello Dolly reference during the kick line until I had to play it a few times. Like,
yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, some of them, right, whether maybe it's an orchestration or there's a couple tricky, but I think I remember seeing that. I think even I was like, oh, is that what that is? I didn't even know that. Because it all goes by so quickly.
But I think a number like that does really stick. Like, people come out of there in awe that you don't even have to be like a super fan of musical theater to appreciate what you do in that. Like, my aunt and uncle went and loved it, and my parents, and school trips, it just appealed to such a wide array of people.
Well, that's another thing, is Something Rotten was a musical often for people who don't like musicals, or people who are like, or worse, oh God, you told me it was about Shakespeare? Jeez Louise. I mean, you can't turn an audience off more, especially if you hate musicals. A musical and it's of Shakespeare? Good night. But yeah, that was, again, so special, because, and then look at our Shakespeare. I mean, my God. And again, you talk about what happened in the room. I can't say enough about, everyone who was involved with that production, as far as that original cast. I'm laughing just thinking of these people, but the work that Christian Borle did on this character, because it was a different guy when I did the week-long reading, and it was a much more straightforward rock and roller guy approach, which was fine, and it worked. But to say that Mr. Borle brought just color and character, Jesus, he just, the things that that he did, his creative impulses as an actor, as a performer, and in the room, in that workshop, the synergy of like what he did and what the writers picked up on, and the work that was done in that respect. Yeah. And now, right, God willing, people will do something wrong forever, everywhere, in schools and dinner theater, and hopefully big professional productions, and and there's a little bit of all of us in that. And that's another thing too that is very like, what, not gratifying because it sounds so whatever, but it's like, wow, we were, being a part of the creation of that. There are things, whether it's in the text or whether it's something that happens or whatever it might be, that was totally directly influenced by the original actors, by that original process, not just the writers. A lot of people who come together, scenic things, design elements. I didn't truly find my character of Nostradamus, if indeed I ever did. No, I didn't until I got into costume. And that costume then proceeded to get worked on because it was so neat and tidy when I first wore it. It was beautiful. And I was like, wow, look at this, fancy. Oh, and you love it because you got new digs. And so then I hear Casey's talking, and they're, because everyone's sort of coming out in costume, little by little, and they're talking, and then I guess my dresser or someone comes up on stage and they're like, well, they want to distress it a little bit. And I'm like, what? It's so beautiful, distress it. They spent the next 3 days, when I say distressing the hell out of that costume, but of course, that's what it was. Of course, that's who that guy was. He would not have had new fancy togs and looked like that. Initially, I have a picture of the initial look before they started distressing it. But yeah, that when we got there, and the hair and the makeup, of course, and for a character like that, who is so larger than life. I mean, that's the thing about, as we know, musical comedy, especially at that level of musical comedy. It's so larger than life. A character like that, and you got to fill it. Ideally, you got to, there's got to be something truly, honestly believable, I believe, and there, and emotional, and the whole thing, and that helped me. All that stuff, the visual layer before what was going on, inside, if you will, that helped me to sort of crack that, to crack my, my big crazy guy. But my big, real crazy guy, I hope, in that way. You don't want to look like, it's hard, a character like, it's dangerous, and I don't know, because again, it's all subjective. So there may have been plenty of people who sat out there and said, oh my God, if he doesn't turn this down, this performance, if he mugs anymore, I don't know. I'm not responsible for that. I'm sorry, but of course I'm an audience member. I'm a director. We're all in that way. Good, a good actor should also, you've got to have your, that whatever, director or editor. By the same token, you've got to commit and trust that those collaborators, I trusted that Casey, Nicola, and the writers were going to keep me on track and not let me look foolish, and not let me, we spent a lot, we had to cut a lot of stuff because the show was too long, and shows like that need to go. I don't think, God, please don't be more than 2.5 hours with an intermission if you are that kind of musical comedy. And we had too much stuff, and a lot of it, well, not a lot of it, some of it was mine. And it was very easy to write for Nostradamus because you can get a lot of mileage out of seeing the future with jokes. And with a crazy guy who had a skull as a companion for a while that just didn't, again, we're like, why are we spending time with me and my skull? We know I'm crazy. We know it just, so I had all this other, there was just stuff. And I'll tell you, honestly, I was never like, maybe there was a line or two. There were a couple things, of course, I'm lying if I said that. But for the most part, it was extraneous. And I looked better because the show was better and the show was tighter and everything just played better. And that's the good of the show. It hurts to lose, you get married to things as an actor, especially when you create things or you invest all this time and passion and they cut your song. It happened. I mean, like Nostradamus used to originally sing the song that Nick sings in the courtroom, "To Thine Own Self Be True." It was Nick and Nostradamus in prison, and I sang it to him. I said, "You've got to be true to yourself." And I sang it to him in the reading, the week long. And when we got back for the workshop, and I knew this beforehand because I'd been given a heads up. They were like, "We sort of took your song away or whatever." And they were like, it just sort of, we thought about it and we were like, it's sort of the 11 o'clock-ish. And even though Nostradamus is instrumental, and I was like, I totally get it. I totally get it. Even me as the actor, I remember I was a little like, okay, actually, wait, I'm lying. I think we did it on its feet in the workshop. And then I remember like sitting on the bench. So anyway, my point is, it made sense. And so, I had to let it go in that way and trust that it was the best for the piece,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And sort of in that same vein with creating all that, most recently you were set to open Mrs. Doubtfire as Frank Hillard, originally played on the screen by theater icon Harvey Fierstein.
Yeah.
So is it daunting to recreate that role, following in sort of those footsteps for the stage? And do you have any idea on when, what what's up next for the show in terms of opening or, where you're going to start back up and such?
Yes. Well, let's see. First of all, yes, dear Harvey, who I'm blessed to call a friend, an acquaintance, who has already wished me well. I'm so upset. We were going to do an interview together before everything shut down, of course, and then it didn't happen. A feature tied to the opening of the show. But anyway, look, this is a different kind of. This is a realistic piece about a family and whatever. So my job in this case specifically is not to go out there and do what Harvey did. Matter of fact, most of the scenes in the musical with the brother and the brother's husband, who is now also more of a character, are not really in the film. I mean, maybe a couple of them are. I'm not off book for the film, to be honest with you. I saw it, of course, and loved it. But anyway, my point is that we are all trying to create, of course, these real people in this real situation, if you will. Rob McClure, doing this amazing job setting up, who this guy Daniel is before he does transform into Doubtfire. At which point, let's face it, with the look and the accent, you're living in comparison land. But the goodwill and what Rob has built up prior to the transformation, people are going to see Rob's Daniel Doubtfire, I think. And it's not, because people are like, oh, who would want to Robin Williams? It's like, again, you're not playing Robin Williams and you can't. And then, again, as the actor, you have to, it's not my responsibility to go out there and be Nathan Lane or whatever, things like that. It's different like when I took over in Addams Family playing Uncle Fester. There's a shell. There's something that you're inhabit. That's a different kind of, creation of character, if you will. But in something like Doubtfire, they're going to cast actors who are going to bring themselves to the table as far as telling this story because of, again, right, we're real people in real situations, I feel. So it's been, again, a great process. I can't say enough about working with Jerry Zaks for the first time, our director. I have learned so much that I actually wish I could now go back 30 years because I would be a much better performer and comedian. But I will hope to carry it forward with me. As far as when, well, look, we'll see how everything plays out. Things are certainly moving in the right direction now with some guidance, and we will hopefully see the ability for audiences to gather again in that way for, concerts, sporting events, and most importantly, live theater. But realistically, we need, and by we, I mean Broadway, New York, professional live theater, we need tourists. We need people coming to the city to see the shows, right? We cannot exist on the people who live in the city alone or even in the tri-state area. So what we're hoping happens is that by sometime maybe summer, certainly fall, some of the tentpole shows, if you will, Hamilton, Wicked, Mormon, Phantom, Lion King, get those shows back. Let's get audiences ideally coming back to the theater and establish, and then we will show up at some point. We don't want to open too early. You don't want to open before audiences are coming back. We can't sustain that. long running shows once they get back on their feet financially, and there will be, I believe, some government subsidies helping us, which is fantastic and so crucial. But it's a tricky thing because you don't want to come back too soon. You don't want to open too soon as a new show. We're not even coming back. I mean, we did 3 preview performances, but for all intents and purposes, we were still rehearsing. We were in rehearsal when word came down. We weren't on the show that night. So we still have a lot of work to do, and we will basically have to go back, not to page 1, but we'll be in a rehearsal room for at least 4 weeks before we would get into the theater and start teching again, I think.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
Well, I know we can't wait to see the show. We will.
We'll be there.
We will be there.
I think it's really good. I'm really proud of it, and I think it's a really good telling of the story as far as putting it in musical form like that. And so yeah, I'm looking forward to you seeing it.
Amazing. So you've had another Tony nominated performance as Franz Liebkind in The Producers in 2001. So you've mentioned a bit about this previously, but what was your biggest takeaway from working on a show with such incredible acclaim and working with such a great team?
Wow. Well, my greatest takeaway is that it doesn't happen that often. Again, it's like lightning in a bottle, if you will, because that was such a crazy big deal at the time, and to be a part of it. And I came into the project. It's a whole story. We do not have time, but I came to the producers as a swing. So when the producers started rehearsal in December of 2000, because 20 years ago right now, we were in Chicago trying it. But anyway, I started as a swing. I was covering, well, first off, the reason I'd been brought in the first place, I was covering Max Bialystock. So that was the first thing they were looking for. And then all of a sudden they were like, oh, well, why don't you cover also Franz Liebkind, Roger Debris, and then like 4 or 5 guys in the ensemble, character men, in this huge dance show where even character men dance. Thank you, Susan Stroman. So so I was flipping out, of course, and the initial rehearsal process was wild that way. But we got to Chicago, and the actor playing Franz had to have some knee surgery, and the next thing you know, I'm playing Franz, and the next thing you know, they're buying the other actor out of his contract, and I'm playing Franz for good and open with the show in April of 2001 on Broadway, and then get a Tony nomination along with all the other principals in the show. I mean, it was just, and went along for that ride, and it was the gift that kept on giving, because I then, after my first year as Franz, took over as Max and played Max for the next 4 years, on Broadway, and then on tour, and then back on Broadway, and then in London, and then back to Broadway. I mean, it was just crazy, and they treated me very well, and I was, I had the time of my life, because again, I was old enough to know at the time that this doesn't happen very often, that you are, you get to be associated with a show like this, that me gets to star in a show like this, not a star by any means, not a name that people knew. So much less make some cash and be smart enough to know to save that cash. That this doesn't happen unless I become a big famous star, and the odds again, not that I'm playing the odds, but I'm realistically, and to this day, I am grateful for that, because not only, was I able to buy an apartment, but in the very time that we are living through right now, where I have absolutely zero income, some of that money that I squirreled away has, it's helpful to have, because a lot of actors don't. We work job to job. I still work job to job. If I would never have a nest egg or anything like that, really, were it not for the producers, because other than that, we go from job to job, and most jobs don't pay. I don't make, crazy salary. I mean, if you go work regionally, you make whatever that theater pays. I mean, we all make the same thing, So anyway, my point is, another thing that the producers gave me, that I am very grateful for, forever grateful for, was any amount of a little bit more financial stability in a business that otherwise gives you none. So it just, and it's the most important thing it gave me as a performer, as an actor, was a certain level of trust in myself and a certain self uh, belief. I think most actors, have their doubts and their judges and all that stuff. It's part of, I think that's real and accepted and should be not ignored. But it shouldn't influence what you do. You know what I mean? That's the thing, is to not let those demons get in the way. It's like, I spent a summer working in an acting class with a couple of Arena Stages core. Arena used to have a rep company of actors. I grew up going to Arena Stage in DC, seeing the same actors in so many different shows over seasons. The same actors doing Tennessee Williams, and then doing Moliere, and then doing, Sam Shepard, and then doing, it was just great. It was amazing. And these actors, some of them gave a fabulous summer acting workshop. And I remember that we all ended up with t-shirts with the mantra, basically, "Not now, I'm busy," because that was the exact response that one needs to, it was a great response mechanism to all those things that are going to occur in the midst of you trying to do what you're doing, which is tell the story, act with the other actor, look them in the, you know what I mean, breathe, live, blah, blah, blah. So the fire engine that goes by out on the street at the wrong time, the audience member who coughs, the fact that I know that Susan Stroman is in the back of the house tonight watching, any of those things, all can be, dealt with a, "Not now, I'm busy," and back to work, that kind of thing. So yes, the experience taught me to trust myself. So I don't have to do that as much, maybe. There you go. I mean, basically, it taught me to just trust my instincts, go for it, trust that, again, your collaborators are going to help you. And also just trust that you know what you're doing. I love this very much. I know what I think good performances consist of, and bad performances, and good shows and bad shows. And sometimes I've seen them all in my deal, so I'm going to let that inform what I do, and trust that it hopefully makes me, good, and lets me do, and I've had, and then again, when I can look back and say, okay, now, since, what is it, my 15th Broadway show, I can, I can say, okay, that happened for a reason. And so I'm here for, and all those things that I hope just make me as good as I can be, because you never stop doubting, you never stop, again, working with Jerry on Doubtfire, he's got a certain style, a certain sense of comedy, which I've seen in action over many years, which is mostly flawless and wonderful. But God, I was so scared and nervous and self-aware, and oh God, everything I'm doing feels wrong, until I could just listen to him, relax, listen to him, do, whatever one's process might be to get there.
Yeah, well, in that same, oh, sorry.
No, please.
I was in that same vein, because you were talking about all the producers, sort of taught you, and, that advice from Arena. In 2002, following the producers, you were honored at Sardi's as one of the famous characters to be put on the wall. So, what was that moment like for you? And then I'm going to couple it with a follow-up question, because, that you're sort of physically a, legend in the theater district. And I think you've had a legendary career, and continue to, as an amazing character actor. We've seen, we talked about your performances in The Producer, Something Rotten, Addams Family. So, was this something that came naturally for you, over the years of your career, and developing your voice as a character actor in the theater?
Yes. I mean, again, I always knew, I was told, at a young age, from people who I trusted and I thought knew better, that I was a character actor, meaning I was going to blossom the older I got, right? I wasn't going to be, a young leading man. I went to school with plenty of those guys. And, when we all came to New York and everybody was getting soap opera work, and I say everybody, I mean, a lot of the younger, prettier, well, we were all younger, but you know what I mean. So I trusted that was true. But it took me a while to find, because, first of all, you need opportunity. You know what I mean? I mean, you can take classes and you can hopefully start to work on different projects, but those specific projects that are going to give you material to work with to further your development and or career, you know, are going to be, you know, hard to, especially when you're starting out, right, or whatever. So you know, and there were random projects that I was involved with, readings and stuff like that early on, that was great, and again helped me to, you know, learn and grow and stuff like that. But there's no question that yes, being able to be involved with the producers then at that point, and to actually get up there on stage and sell that material, you know, do that material and be a part of that kind of thing, you know, was gold. And yes, as I sort of time to let, you know, allowed me to trust it. Yeah, you know, this is what I do. So, and to embrace that probably a little more, you know, in all the future projects that I did and do. So yeah. And then, you know, things like Sardi's and things like, you know, all the little the perks, or the not, my God, it's a hell of a lot more than a perk. I mean, it's, you know, it's what an honor, of course, to be a part of this community in that way is so wonderful. And that's sort of my favorite thing. And what I miss the most right now too is our community. You know, we are really, it's not a very big, you know, I always say our little village of Anatepka. There's only, you know, there's only so much square mileage here in Manhattan, and those of us doing it. And then, you know, especially then when in the Broadway neighborhood, and then organizations like BCFA and the Actors Fund and other things that bring us together for benefits or whatever it might be. You know, there's a wonderful community here, and a generous, wonderful community. And so being a part of that has been so rewarding, and I'm so proud to, you know, for all that means as well, you know, especially right now when so many artists are hurting, and seeing the way our community is rallying, and the Actors Fund, and, you know, Stars in the House, and Seth Rudetsky's, you know, the things that are happening, and the people that are working very hard, again, for these subsidies, these governmental subsidies that will help live theater get back on its feet, because everybody's going to need help, you know, from the top on down. Just because these big $1 million Broadway shows, you know, are funded by, yes, million, you know, companies and stuff like that, you know, we know there's not a lot of, you know, people aren't throwing cash around as far as that goes, and it's going to cost money to get these things back up and running, and buffer and stuff like that if you have losing weeks and blah blah blah. So yeah, but it's an amazing, yes, it's an amazing community. I'm very proud of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you have had so many amazing roles. You've created roles. Do you have a dream role that you have yet to play?
Well, until a couple of years ago, I would have said Sweeney Todd, but then I had the opportunity to be a part of this crazy, wonderful off-Broadway production that actually took place in a pie shop that had started over in London, literally site-specific at like one of the oldest pie shops, if not the oldest, in London. And Sondheim, Steve, as he insists that you call him, Steve loved it, and with that blessing, it had a little bit of a run in the West End. They rebuilt a pie shop, and then they did the very same thing downtown here at the Barrow Street Theater. And so anyway, I got to play the Beetle in this 8-person environmental production of Sweeney Todd that was one of the most thrilling, amazing experiences of my life. Terrifying, because it's my favorite piece ever. And it's, as we know, a tricky sing, my God, for all of us, 8 people, mind you, who sang that whole score, much less if you're playing Sweeney or whatever, right? So yeah, I realized, my God, I don't know if I want to sing Sweeney 8 times a week. That's a hell of a responsibility, much less the fact that I just feel like I got to do such a version and production of that show that I just want to leave it alone. I'm good. My Sweeney is, you know, I'll see it again. I'll listen to it at any given moment, but yeah. So what's left is I would love to, the big musical comedy queen in me would love to do Lacage and would love to play Alban in Lacage. It's yeah, I would say that's sort of the one role that I would still love to do. Yes, I think it would be fun. Love the show, love the score, you know, and I think it would be fun. You know, ideally, I've always said I think it would be great fun to do it with another actor and alternate roles every whatever, however one would do that. You know, because there are so many of us, I think, who could, you know, play, you know, I mean, I definitely want to play Alban, believe me. I want to sing Mascara, but it would be such a cool thing to to swap roles. Yeah. So anyway, yeah. So if you
Great.
know anyone, let me know. Yeah.
You've shared so many great stories with us today. We've been laughing the whole time, but is there one particular story or a set of stories that you just love to talk about from your career?
Oh gosh, I feel like I have been, to be honest with you, right? I mean, because these things that we're talking about, again, these experiences, specifically producers and something rotten. Um, gosh, oh gosh, that's a big question. You know, I don't know. I mean, the sweet, and then I just, of course, touched on Sweeney. I'm just thinking of, experiences that have been, very special. But, someone asked me the opposite question. Someone said a few weeks ago I did, and they, what's, have you done something, you regret or you didn't enjoy or you wish you hadn't done or whatever? And I'm like, no, because even though, believe me, there are a couple experiences I look back on and I roll my eyes and I'm like, oh my God, because whatever, the piece wasn't good, it wasn't work, whatever the reasons were. But with each of those experiences, I could probably list more things about it that I found that were positive and that were good. Usually it's someone I met, at least one person, right, from each experience, if not more. Someone I worked with, whatever, the city I was in, Philadelphia was great. The show, not so much. But, so there's always been, I find something. And as we know, we want to work. So these were all jobs that meant work weeks that meant health insurance. So that's never a bad thing. And so we're all going to do, we have the joy of going from job to job. So if this job sucks, well, ideally it's, unless you're in a hit Broadway show that you're hating, and then I feel really bad for you. But no, unless most jobs are going to be what? You're regional, you're working for 6 weeks or you're, 2 months, whatever the hell it is, it's going to end. So, so shut up and do your job. You're a professional and you'll get to the next one as far as that goes,
Well, on that note, that's a good note because I want to say congratulations on all of your work and all of your successes and your ever-growing career because there's still a lot left. I know it for you. So we can't wait. We'll go, we'll be there.
We'll be there.
Doubtfire and everything beyond. So
say hi.
Thank you so much for coming on. And, we're thrilled to highlight your career and, stay well and safe until we can all gather again soon.
Yes, it was my pleasure. Thank you guys and all the best to you. And yes, everybody stay safe and see you at the theater.